Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm doing a lecture for my master's degree, and I have to, we're going to send it to my teacher, and it's going to be an interactive lecture. I want you guys to act normal and answer questions that if I ask you a question, answer it how you normally would. It's going to be an interaction. It's not going to be me talking to you for 10 minutes, okay? So, my lecture is called The American Dream of the People After World War II. All right. So my first question to you is, what is the American dream? What do you think the American dream is?
Freedom.
Freedom?
Yeah, the ability to be independent and own your own.
Okay, independence and freedom. So those are two concepts of the American dream. Now, as you know, let's just say the previous chapter was about World War II, so now back to my lecture. During World War II, most of the young, capable working men were fighting in the war. So between 1939 and 1945, there was a huge gap for the workforce. So who filled in? Who took over while the guys were overseas fighting? Women. Women took over a lot. What about in agriculture? Who took over in agriculture? Hispanics. There was a huge influx of Mexicans and Puerto Ricans coming up and filling the spots in the agricultural community to, so we could still have food and we could still be a productive society and a productive country. Now, part of this is wondering what happened to these people in 1945 when the soldiers came back. So when the soldiers came back, what do you think happened to all the people who were in agriculture or in the factories or driving the taxi cabs? What happened to these working class people? They lost their jobs. Why?
Because the people that aren't working back.
And why would we give them... Do you want to get that? Why would we give them their jobs back and take it from somebody else?
Because there's the beginning.
Keep going. There's a little bit more there. Why would there be... why would we try to keep the soldiers employed?
Because they went to fight for our country and they left what was theirs, so they should have to get it back.
So the concept is, before we left, the women were in the homes, the Hispanics weren't in this country, and the people who fought the war, who sacrificed, should get their jobs back. So a couple of things that make it really interesting is, number one, we're going to talk about 4 different groups of people here. We're going to talk about the women, we're going to talk about the Latinas, we're going to talk about the African Americans, and we're also going to talk about the Native Americans, because these are the 4 groups of people that are mostly the forgotten people after World War II. So for the women, they started out as housewives before the war, right? So in 1939, 1940, there were about 12 million women in the workforce, and they were the secretaries, and they were the waitresses, and they were the, not the mechanics, not the engineers, not the carpenters. But in 1945, there was over 18 million. 18 million women were working and had jobs and were no longer housewives. They were working double duty, weren't they? Because most of them had kids. So they would have to drop their kids off and then go to work and then come home, take their kids, take care of the kids, feed them dinner, blah, blah, blah. All along being by themselves because their men were overseas. So in 1945, 85% of them didn't want to give up their jobs. Didn't want to have the men come back and take their jobs. So what happened? Do you think that would cause resentment?
Yeah, and it causes, a push for more individual rights.
Very good. At this time, women still couldn't even vote. So they pushed for more individual rights. What else? Do you think they pushed to keep their jobs?
Yeah.
What happened to their American dream? Did they still want the white picket fence with the husband, Lucille Ball style, honey, I'm home?
They wanted the right to do more.
They wanted their independence. They wanted their freedom. Just like the American dream still is today. Only then they had it, and it was taken away from them. So another group that we were going to talk about is the African Americans. Now this is a little different because for most African American women, they were working anyways. they didn't have the opportunity to be a one-income family. So most of the women were working anyways. But the men, the African-American men that were drafted, did they have integrated, were they in the Army with whites? Were they in integrated units? No. Good. You were right. Good. No. They were segregated. So not only were they drafted and segregated, so they weren't asked, do you want to enlist? They were told, you're going to enlist and you're going to sit over there, not with us. But they actually had a higher rate of what's called a blue discharge. And a blue discharge is not an honorable discharge or a dishonorable discharge. It is a discharge. It is very hard to get different perks from the Army, like the GI Bill and the Veterans Clubs and all that from an undistinguishable discharge. So these people who were told you have to come work, you have to come fight, you have to come do all this, but you're going to sit over there. And then when you come back, you're not going to have any honor for fighting and for giving your life and for trying. What do you think that did to their American dream?
Ruined it.
Yeah, it ruined it. What was the change that happened afterwards?
Wait, after.
After World War II, after they had to fight, had to do all that, what happened with the African American society?
Oh, isn't that when they started pushing for their rights?
Yes. After they had this idea that we can be equal and we can be connected and socially working together, then we come back and we don't have respect. We don't have any compensation. We're not getting any jobs, even though we were the soldiers fighting too. All the white guys are getting all the jobs. So it also started, like you said, for the women's movement, it also started a civil rights movement. The whole idea of this American dream that is obtainable, but not. So for the Latinas and the Mexican Americans, they came up in 1942 for the agriculture, like you said. So in 1942, they came up, and then their American dream was, we worked really hard for the society. We kept the society running. And now you come back and you're going to want to kick us out. You're going to want to take everything away from us, not give us an education, not help our kids, not take care of society, of our society. So their American dream was squished too, correct? And then the last one is a little different, is the Native Americans. So the Native Americans were drafted into the war as well. As what? Do you guys remember this? You can go over it. As code talkers. Mostly the Navajo were code talkers.
Oh.
It was how the code wasn't broken, because it was the Navajo Indian language, and nobody had ever heard it before. It was a new world. Nobody in Europe had ever seen these people, ever heard this language, so it was a wonderful thing. But when the Indians were drafted, not just for the code talkers, but for just American citizens to come and fight in the war, they were actually held in really high standards because of this historical ideal of the great Indian warrior. They have courage, they have strength, they have determination. So they were held to a high esteem, and they were integrated with the whites. So they were, kind of put on a warrior pedestal, fighting. Number one, you're the only codes that aren't being broken. You have this history of this great warring nations. But when you come back, are we going to give you any jobs? Are we going to give you a house off a reservation, or do you still have to live in the undesirable parts of America that we put you on in the first place?
You have to go back to where you started.
You got to go back. So also the women in the Native American societies were asked to come off reservations and go work in the factories. So all of a sudden these communities that never had any money had a huge amount of money. They had wealth. They had some amount of glory for the code talkers and the warriors. They had this life of integration, of understanding the American culture, of their culture being understood. And then 1945 comes, and this whole idea that we could be a united nation gets put back on the reservation. You can't have these jobs. You can't work. You're an Indian. You got to go back there. So this whole idea of the American dream, and we're going over to fight the Nazis and the Japanese to help promote this American dream, this ideal that our country is right and our ideas are right and we're going to fight for human rights. And then we're going to come back